This next video is going to be about the National Bank and then a crisis that occurs between Andrew Jackson and pretty much Congress, and it's all over the National Bank. Now, if you remember, we talked about the National Bank before. It's the place where they put all of our money, or not all of our money, but put all of the money um, during the 1800s into this institution. Here's a picture for you on the screen of what it would have looked like in that era. Um, so this happens in 1832. There's a big battle over this, and if you remember, there was a big battle between Hamilton and the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans, and Jefferson was the leader of those guys who didn't want the National Bank. At this point, what did it actually do? The National Bank controlled the nation's money supply by giving out or holding back money to smaller banks. So the bank actually regulated how much money was available in the um, in the country. So this small one institution was deciding for everyone how much money should be allowed into the system. Um, they loaned out money to businesses, and they would either give out money to the smaller banks or take some of it back. And this is pretty much what the Federal Reserve does today to make sure we don't have too much inflation, which can cause problems in the economy, to make sure that we don't have um, too many issues monetarily. Um, they also kept the basic function of this was they also kept the government money, which is collected through taxes and tariffs, which we've already talked about, all the different ways their taxes can be collected, and tariffs, remember, are taxes on imported goods. And I got a little picture down here on the bottom to show, all the money in the country probably at some point flows through the National Bank, which is important. Now, the huge problem that people started getting upset about. One, it had a lot of power because it controlled the amount of money available for loans. So if they didn't like a certain bank, they could just say, you know what, we're not giving you the money. If they decided there's too many people out there didn't need loans, or there's too much money flowing out there, they would stop giving out loans, and that made people like poor farmers angry, obviously, because they need money for feed and supplies and all kinds of things like that, and seeds. And if they can't get the available money, then they think the restrictions are too high, they can't grow their crops, and they can't live, so things don't work out very well for them. The bank is not owned by the government. It's actually owned by private individuals. This is one of the brilliant pieces of Hamilton's ideas. Remember, he keeps saying, let people invest in our country. It'll provide pride in the country. It'll make people actually want to make the country succeed. But at the same time, this is not the government regulating this. This is just some guys who happen to have a lot of money, who invested this money in the bank at the beginning, and now they're making even more money off interest rates and that sort of thing from other people, and loans and that sort of thing. So they put a lot of power into the hands of a few non-elected businessmen, and this is a sticky situation. This is where Andrew Jackson really takes issue with this, is that they are not elected. These are not people that people select. These are people who just happen to have money, put it in the bank, and now they're running the bank. And because they're running the bank, they're actually running the entire economy of the United States, which makes a lot of people extremely upset. Many people thought that the bank was corrupt, that the owners could be greedy, money changing hands, people looking the other way, certain loans being given out to certain people, other people not being given loans. Um, Bank decisions, they were thought to be made in secret, and at times it was not managed very well. If the bank is mismanaged, then the economy of the United States would go down and collapse. If the economy was mismanaged, then people are hurt. And so if the bank is mismanaged and the economy is mismanaged, people's lives are affected. And this makes people upset. And to their credit, there is some corruption, I think, in the bank. That there is some money changing hands that make things happen quicker or smoother for some people and not others. There's the whole thing that when Andrew Jackson threatens to not support the bank anymore, that the head of the bank starts taking money out of the till. I mean, that's greed. That's corruption right there. They're pulling money from the Bank of the United States out to pay to convince people to keep the bank. Um, you know, so Andrew Jackson, Congress actually votes to extend the charter of the bank, but Andrew Jackson says, "Don't even bother. I'm going to veto this thing." But of course, Congress gets it through. They actually get it through. Everyone seems to have come to an agreement that this is something we need. Andrew Jackson says, "No, this is not something that we need." And it ends the bank in 1832. This is it. The bank is gone. Jackson believes the bank is undemocratic because it has so much influence. It has too much power over the economy of the United States, and Jackson didn't like this. And he believes the bank, people aren't elected. It's undemocratic. It's just a bunch of rich dudes, the 1% guys that are controlling the fate of everyone in the country. Jackson constantly harps, in the election about, people participating and more people participating, and the people should control things. And so the bank was no different. The bank should be controlled by the people, and he said it only benefited wealthy people. So I got a little cartoon here from toondoo.com that I found. It's by MSMS, so this is not me. I didn't create this. Giving credit to the people who did this. In 1832, President Jackson vetoed a bill that would have established a second bank of the United States. Several reasons he comes up with, again, are because he doesn't want the rich people, these people that he believes are rich, corrupt people with evil mustaches, laughing at the rest of the poor people who are suffering destitute on the street, and regular, ordinary people who, would eventually just be on the street if they weren't already. Um, he didn't want the rich to continue to prosper while the people in poverty were continued to be in hunger, and he thought this was a way to fight that. He also wanted to avoid certain regions in the country making more money off of other regions. The northern region had more banks, it had more money, it was starting to grow economically, it had more manufacturing power, which eventually will become even more important. We talk about the Civil War. The Southerners don't have these things. They do make a lot of money off of other things, but the people, not all that far, but people west and south, they have a hard time making things work. And people up, especially up in the North New England region, are making money. At least that's from Jackson's perspective. Remember, he's from Tennessee, so he doesn't have a high opinion of people from that part of the country. So what happens after this? Jackson closes the bank. I mean, this is huge. We have all the money. What are you going to do with all this money? What is the point? Where does it go? The National Bank is closed, and Jackson takes all the funds that were in the state bank or in the National Bank and puts them into state banks, which people called the pet banks. So these were banks that Jackson liked. These are banks that people felt really worked, or that he really thought worked. They were usually banks in different states. They were like let's say there was a Bank of Maryland or something. I don't know the exact name, but let's say there was a Bank of Maryland. He would have given it to that bank. 5 years later, though, after they closed the banks, I mean, before this, there's up and downs in the economy, especially when we talked about Jefferson's Embargo Act. But it's fairly stable. And then 5 years after they put all the money in the state banks, you have the Panic of 1837. Economic depression. People lose their savings. People lose their homes. People lose their businesses and jobs. These are ordinary people who lose all these things. We look back on it today, a lot of people blame Jackson's veto for causing the economic turmoil. The person who really gets blamed during the time period is Martin Van Buren, who comes after Jackson. Remember, he's basically Jackson's right-hand man in terms of politicking, in terms of, his campaign manager and that, and people thought he would be just like Jackson, and then he gets saddled with this horrible depression that happens in 1837. He can't really do much as president, and people blame him for the situation. But I think it goes back a little further than that. Here's an example of a railroad stock price index starts in 1834. So remember, the battle, was 1832 in there. So you do get the slight uptick when they start giving out loans and that sort of thing, but then you end up with a sliding down. Now, I know this isn't perfect. This doesn't show everything that you need to know, but it can show you the decline overall, where people are not investing in railroad stock. So, and then eventually you start getting a recovery in the 1840s, and that changes. So, why is this important? Jackson sets a pattern of limited government in the economy, and this idea lasts until the 1930s. I mean, this idea is still going on till today. I mean, we're still battling over this idea. How involved should the government be in the economy? I think at this point, most people agree there should be some kind of regulation to stabilize it, but if you go too far one direction, where you end up with not enough regulation, you end up with the economy going up and down through cycles where it's very painful. Lots of prosperity and then lots of depressions. If you go the other way, where the government's doing everything, sometimes it stifles growth. Nothing grows. The economy doesn't grow. People don't have jobs. So you got to kind of find a middle ground here. But even today, I have a picture of Rick Santorum in 2012 saying we need to stay out of the economy. In the 1920s, 1890s, all these guys eventually, the Democrats don't really jump on this anymore, but the Republicans are all about this. And it's just one of those huge issues that we're still trying to figure out today. But Jackson's one of those first one that says, you know what, the government shouldn't do much at all with the economy. Just let it do its thing. It'll go up and down and grow. Some people say Jackson didn't really understand how the economy was supposed to run. I think he understood some of it, but probably not all of it. I don't think anybody really understood all of it then. They were starting to, but I don't think it was quite there yet. So this is the end of this one, and continue on to the other part of the nullification crisis.